Um, Colleagues, I would want to advise you that the minutes of the last session are still being worked on, and so therefore cannot now be put before the committee. Could I have a motion, please, that those minutes be deferred?
I beg to move that motion that the minutes be deferred from the previous session.
Thank you, Minister Ford and Minister Cummins, respectively. We turn now to the issue of oral presentations. We have with us this morning the technical team from the Ministry of Transport, Works and Water Resources. My understanding is that present on the other side of the room, once again for social distancing purposes, Mr. Jason Bowen, the Deputy Chief Technical Officer, Acting, Mr. Mark Durant, Chief Planning Officer, Mr. Mark Cummins, Permanent Secretary of the Ministry, and Mr. Philip Tudor, Deputy Chief Technical Officer. Good morning, gentlemen all. Mr. Cummins, as Permanent Secretary, I will address you. I would want to begin by offering you the same opportunity that I have offered to others who have have agreed to come to give evidence before this committee. And that is, if there are any statements you would want to make orally before you are questioned with respect to the issue of vending, and I would entreat you to treat to it broadly, not necessarily only in the context of the what? Oh, apparently Mr. Cummins is not there. Gentlemen, I apologize. I am only now seeing that Mr. Cummins is not there. Perhaps you all can assist me. Who is there? Mr. Bowen, can you hear me?
Yes.
Fine.
Jason Bowen, Deputy Chief Technical Officer, Acting Ministry of Transport and Works.
Fine, thank you. Welcome. And
Mark.
Mr. Durant, you're there too?
Yes, sir.
And you're the Chief Planning Officer?
Chief Planning Officer.
Okay, fine. Do you all, either of you, wish to make any opening statement to the committee on the issue of vending as it impacts the ministry, the ministry's operations?
You can make a joke. Oh.
I sense I may have thrown you a curveball. Ball your bouncer.
We want to say that we, particularly in these times, we've offered our general support of the policy and the bill, and we believe that vending provides the opportunity for Barbadians to make a living, and that is something that adds to economic growth and development of the country. We do have to look at some of the technical issues related to the layouts and the vending zones and so on, but in general, we would like to offer our support to this policy, and I think we could start there.
All right, thank you very much. And that is really why I wanted to hear from you all, specifically with regard to the plan to have the vending zones, because as you would have appreciated, the development of vending zones in Barbados is something that the bill is contemplating. My question to you now, perhaps before we go to the vending zones, could you share with the committee any of the concerns or challenges that are now confronted by the ministry with respect to vending along the highways of Barbados as now exist?
Hi, I'm Jason Bowen speaking. In terms of concerns that we would have relative to the vendors, generally speaking, most of our sidewalk areas are generally designed for walking and not necessarily for vending. And that is, because of that, obviously once vendors set up, the area that is now left for pedestrians to walk is now much reduced. And that is an area that is of concern. We have tried in the past to try our best to find a way to work around that. But largely that is a major concern. Also, another concern is that with vending, a lot of the lands along roads are privately owned. So when vendors do set up alongside the road, they actually are setting up on private property. So that is something that is of concern as well.
You're saying that they set up on private property?
Yes, technically speaking, they are even on some of the sidewalks. That sidewalk in some cases is owned by private individuals. So to just set up on that is a challenge.
Oh, not the sidewalk itself, but you're saying that they set up and obstruct private property, because the sidewalk would not be private property.
Not necessarily true. It is in some cases, some people own to the center of the road in many cases in Barbados. So there's a right to use the road, a right to pass on the road, but it doesn't mean that government necessarily in all cases owns the road. The ABC Highway, that corridor, the government owns that corridor, but there are some roads in Bridgetown that the landowners own to the center of the road.
Okay. The concern then would be this: are there any, I suppose, recommendations that you would want to make with respect to some of the challenges you see now along the side of the highway? Let us take, for example, the ABC Highway. Let's use that as for ease of reference. I don't want to restrict you only to that, but if you care to share on that particular geographical area, I'd be obliged.
Well, before the ABC Highway itself, it is a road that we own the corridor. I can't remember exactly how wide, but probably up to there's an area that's defined that the government owns, and that includes areas where vendors can operate, if you want to say that. So I don't think there's a major challenge there, except for on the ABC Highway, we must understand the speeds at which traffic will travel are extremely high. And if we were to do any kind of vending along the ABC Highway, we would probably recommend an area where you have to actually pull off of the highway, and carriers would not park, say for instance, in Warrens, where persons park on the shoulder. The shoulder is an area that we wouldn't really want persons to be parking and carrying out that activity. So it would have to be in an area that is a little further away from the shoulder of the road, and so as to improve road safety. Right? So there is that opportunity that you can have vendors beyond that shoulder area. In terms of the areas now, like for instance, I don't want to say just Bridgetown, but the areas where owners probably own to the center of the road. In the past, vendors at one point in time came to the ministry where they would seek no objection letters to utilize the roadway to vend, but we would always have a stipulation that they must have the permission of the landowner. So that is one thing that you can look at in terms of this bill, if maybe to be incorporated in such for that activity. But again, we must still be careful in the way how we do these things, because everything has any kind of road, any kind of vending alongside the roadway will have an impact, or can have an impact in terms of traffic flow, because persons will invariably park on the road and block traffic, and that will cause problems.
Do you now issue permissions formally to persons who are vending alongside the road? Let's again use the geographical zone of the ABC Highway. A number of persons you would have seen vending, whether it be fruits, coconut water, vegetables, etc., eggs, all sorts of things are sold alongside the highway. Do you all ever issue any formal permissions at present?
No, that process, it came to an end. I cannot remember what year it was, but we were advised to stop. And we have stopped that for quite some time. So no vendor on the roadway would have such a permission from the Ministry of Transport and Works.
Leader of the opposition.
Mr. Boyne, morning to you. Thank you, Chair. Mr. Boyne, you still there?
Yes, sir, I'm here. I'm here.
How long have you been a technical officer at the Public Works?
From 2005.
A long time. Is there any, or are there any specific suggestions, recommendations which you would make to a government that is intent on facilitating vending, empowering vendors, and in that effort, accommodating them for the economic activity along the highways of Barbados, with ABC Highway, those types of highways? Is there any specific recommendations you would make as to how we could respond to a situation like that and make that possible, make it real in a meaningful way?
Well, currently in the ministry, or at least we have been for a number of years actually, we have developed a number of locations along the ABC Highway where we feel that once we carry out certain infrastructure improvements, provide an area for vehicles to pull off of the highway and into a parking area, and there's a separate facility for the vendors to set up and ply their trade, but it's still close to the highway where persons can still visually see the vendors from the highway as their motorists as they're passing. We believe that we have some locations that we think that vending can occur.
You have identified those locations already?
Yes, we have some areas identified. We have locations where we were looking at Warrens. We were looking at.
So where in Warrens we're talking about?
Well, we have one location at this point in time that we were looking at was the area to the north of the Massey complex alongside the road. There's that area, but then there's another area also that we were considering as an alternative, which is the area by the roundabout. This is Everton Weeks roundabout, the northeastern quadrant that is opposite First Caribbean. That open area there, we're looking at there as well. And that is in the Warrens area. We're thinking that if we can design an area where you can pull off of the highway, park your vehicle, and carry out your trade with the vendor, and then you can have easy access back onto the highway.
So it's all like vending parks, for lack of a better word.
You could say that, yeah.
So you actually pull off. The vendors are actually off the side of the road. They
Yes.
are. Yeah, okay.
Yes, but you can still see them from off of the highway.
Yeah. Apart from Warrens, which other area?
Another area we had at Top Rock, and we also have at Dayton Griffith School. That there's some open area there as well.
I beg your pardon, where is that?
Dayton Griffith.
Dayton Griffith,
Okay, fair enough.
yeah. Yeah, and there's another location that we're looking at. This is by JTC Ramsey roundabout. That is by the Bussa roundabout, and that area that is by the new Cave Shepherd building is a park at the moment. We were looking at there's another area where we can place vendors. In fact, there's some vendors in the area already. So it is a good location we are thinking for vending.
What about further across the two-way highway, can't remember the name of it now.
Ronald Highway?
Wrong map. Like I see some vending activity emerging along there.
Yeah, we were looking at Bagatelle. We were working on the Bagatelle.
You weren't mandated to locate one at Bagatelle, were you?
Well, we have options, and it is part of our remit. Well, as I said, we were working on this for a number of years, so we are just exploring all options at this point in time.
Okay.
But there's a tremendous passion for it to be located at Bagatelle, so you don't worry about that. Don't let the leader of the opposition get in
No,
that.
Bagatelle is a good site. I agree with that wholeheartedly. Yeah, I do. It's happening anyhow. Eagle Hall?
No.
Talking about Eagle Hall, I wish somebody knocked down that market. And Mr. Boeing, you have any influence up there that could have that happen?
I will hold my thoughts on that one.
Chair.
You're lead the opposition. You're finished? Okay, and a few members want to speak to you, sir. First of all, Senator Althea Wiggins is going to address you from online. She's going to ask you some questions from online. Then I have Minister Adrian Ford and then Minister Indar Weir, in that order. Please proceed, Senator Wiggins.
A very good morning to everyone. Good morning to you, Mr. Chairman, and good morning to Mr. Boyne.
The technical people have to raise Senator Wiggins' volume. There you go, ma'am. Floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Good morning to Mr. Boyne. Good morning to everyone on the committee. I noted Mr. Boyne gave some suggestions on the ABC Highway, which is my favorite area, as Mr. Chairman knows. I was thinking when you said by Dighton Griffith, you are looking at traffic going only in one direction, especially along these highways, because if you are in a particular direction coming down to Dighton Griffith School, unless you are, regardless of where you are anyhow, you still have to go to the Kendall Hill roundabout if you really are going back to the airport. Can you consider a vending zone closer as well? Because the vending zones can be opposite each other on both sides of the highway. Do you have an issue with vending zones, let's say one at Dighton and one on the land going past Coiman, going back in the direction of the airport for traffic that is traversing both ends of the highway, rather than restricting it to just one side? I want to ask you that question first, sir. Mr. Boyne?
Hi, good morning. At present, we were currently looking at the area which is to the which side is that? That's the east of Dighton Griffith School. That area that abounds more so the Gall Hill Kingsland Road, right? So theoretically speaking, you would, if you're approaching from Coiman, you would have to make that right turn onto the Gall Hill Road to then access onto the Gall Hill Road and then access the area. Or if you're approaching from the airport side, you would have to make the left turn onto the Gall Hill Kingsland Road and access the site. On exiting, you would have to exit onto the Gall Hill Kingsland Road, make the left turn, and go towards the roundabout, I think, by Coiman, by Kendall Hill, and then you can then go in any direction you want. We were looking at that because we were saying, well, that should take care of all directions. However, we are not opposed to looking at vending on the other side of the road. It is, it's open area, and that is something we can investigate as well.
The particular land that you're referring to is the one on the left side opposite the Rubis gas station there at Kendall Hill. That's the one you're referring to? Because if there is a vending zone, then the traffic coming to the roundabout there would then have access to any direction. Which one were you referring to? I didn't quite get the location.
The area that I'm referring to is the area to the direct east of the Dighton Griffith School fence. There's an open area there. If you look at the junction, this is the junction that is by, this is the junction, the ABC Highway, Gall Hill, Kendall Hill Road. It's right there. It's to, as I said, to the east of the fence, but bounded by the Gall Hill Road. So, at that point in time, you should technically be able to access it, get to it from any direction. However, on exiting, you will have to leave via the Gall Hill Road onto the ABC Highway, then go towards the Kendall Hill roundabout, and then from there you can then choose which direction you want. I hope that explains it better.
Okay, for now, but we'll come back to it. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Senator Wiggins. Minister Adrian Ford.
Good morning to all. It's Mr. Boyne, all right, Mr. Boyne, sir, good morning to you. I don't think when I'm passing the highway, I become visually impaired. I'm not certainly disabused of the conversation that is taking place this morning with my colleagues and you, Mr. Boyne, as it relates to vendors on the highway. Currently, there are a lot of vendors set up all across Barbados on the highways, whether it's coconut, fruit vending, vegetable vending, and they set up on the, we call the lay-by roads. Some people may call them layways. I don't know the term that you use, but they are the side roads adjacent to the main highway roads. And I want to say today that I don't think that persons just come and set up and start to vend because they are disobedient, they have a level of flippancy, they are churlish in their behavior. I don't think it is none of the above. I really think that they're set up because out of a social need, probably financial need, there's a requirement for them to be involved in some type of entrepreneurship activity. And vending happens to be that activity of the day. And secondly, they look for high traffic areas. My thing is, and I think that this is where the policy will come into place, and the minister who has the unreserved gusto to do it is sitting in the chair, to look at a situation where we provide those commercial spaces off the layways in areas that persons can drive in to vending sites and drive back onto the highway in a way that does not affect the flow of traffic or cause any danger to pedestrian or vehicular traffic. That is the stage I think that we are at in this type of conversation, because the activity is already there, and I think that that is where we are going. My question to you though, Mr. Boyne, is as it stands, as we speak, in this moment of time, what is the procedure that your ministry use in order to remove those vendors if need be? Because I won't think that any of us in here would like to see the MTW turn up with a group of officers asking vendors to put up the things and trying to arrest anyone. What is the procedure being used if there is a danger, and how do you deal with that situation from the Ministry of Transport and Works point of view? Thanks.
I will be honest with you, that is a point that I think I can have to defer to the permanent secretary when he comes here, because at this point in time, as I said, the ministry has not engaged in giving any permissions for vendors in a long time, but we have not taken any action to move any either. But I think that is something definitely the PS would have to answer on that one.
But Mr. Boyne, I may have misunderstood your answer to my question. I thought that my question was, do you all issue any permissions for persons who are vending alongside the highway? And I thought that your answer to that was in the negative.
As I said, at this point, no, we don't issue any permissions. We don't even issue no objection to using the road either.
So in other words, when we see people vending, and I'm mindful that this is being carried on Parliament's YouTube channel, so the ordinary person must understand what we're saying. When we see people vending alongside the highway, effectively right now, this is just sprung up organically. You go, you take up a little spot for yourself, and you do what you have to do. At present, there is no requirement for there to be any permissions to do it. It is not regulated in that way by the ministry. Is that correct?
At this point in time, it's not regulated by the Ministry of Transport and Works.
Okay, fine. Your permanent secretary has just joined you. I want to welcome
Yes.
you, Mr. Cummins, and thank you for taking time from your very busy schedule to be with us today.
Thank you very much, Chair.
In your absence, we've been talking primarily to Mr. Boyne about the issue of vending along the highway, and you would have heard the question which he was just speaking to, and I think he deferred to you. It arose from Minister Ford's quizzing of him, and he wanted, Minister Ford that is, wanted to get some clarity as to what the procedures would be in the event that you needed to move a vendor or vendors, plural, from their locations along the highway at present.
Thanks, Chair. Development goes back to the Town Country Planning Act because vending constitutes development. But on the highway, and I'm also including the road reserve as part of the highway, that should fall directly under the remit of the Chief Technical Officer, who has responsibilities under the Highways Act. And by the way, that officer was invited to be here with us this morning. So under the Highways Act, the Chief Technical Officer can mandate the removal of vendors from along the wayside. But normally, the Chief Town Planner would serve an enforcement notice and then seek the assistance of the Ministry of Transport and Works or the assistance of the Chief Technical Officer to have the structures removed. Now, if there is no structure, let's say for example, I go out, I buy 400 coconuts, and I decide I want to set up just a table with some bottles and sell them from the edge of the highway, on the shoulder of the highway. That is primarily a matter for the Highways Act, and by extension, the Chief Technical Officer. But based on my previous experience, there was always a very collaborative effort to ensure that both Town Planning and MTW were in sync. And if you would bear with me, this was done, and a specific study, land use study, was done of the ABC Highway, and vending sites were selected. Vending sites were granted planning permission, and these vending sites included sanitary facilities and other and shade, which would allow the vendors to operate in an area of comfort where motorists will divert from the highway, go to these structures, purchase their produce, and then make their way safely back onto the highway. Because as we will all agree, 80 kilometers an hour and vending on the shoulder of that carriageway spells for disaster. Fortunately, and I hope it continues like that, we have not had any major accidents, but one area that really scares me, especially on Sundays, is the area right outside of Dayton Griffith School, where cars are zipping by. People are getting into and out of their cars on the traffic side, and some brave ones also across the other side of the road, because we now have vending on both sides of the road. So in my opinion, Chair, I welcome this bill. I've had an opportunity to read some of it, and I think it is a step in the right direction. Vending is a very important economic activity, but as a trained land use planner, there has to be order. I don't think we can allow persons to come and set up at any and every location. And unfortunately, in Barbados, our vendors, they do two things, which we should work closely with them and make sure that it is stamped out. One, they leave the waste behind, and two, they like to put up structures to claim territory. I think if we can control that, and the selection of sites on the ABC Highway was intended to deal with both of those, because it was off of the road, and provision would have been made for skips where the waste from the vending activity, namely coconut shells, could have been placed in the skips and then and safely removed And also, there will be no need for vendors to set up little shacks or little structures, because there was a well-established structure where they can carry on the activities. The motorists can drive in, park, get out, carry out their activities, back in the car, and then safely rejoin traffic. Sorry for the extended answer, sir.
No, I appreciate the extended answer, Permanent Secretary, because you have shed a little bit of light. I think that Mr. Bowen may have alluded to the land use study. Are you in a position to tell us approximately when this study was done, please?
Got to stretch your memory, but this would have been done probably around 96 or 97, because at the time I was Deputy Chief Town Planner and my former boss, Mr. Lionel Nurse, was in the chair, and we would have worked closely with the then Chief Technical Officer, Mr. Cedric Archer, in setting up the ABC Highway Land Use Study. But the actual selection of the, and life is very ironic, the actual selection of the sites was done when Lionel Nurse was Permanent Secretary at the Ministry of Transport, and Frank Thornhill was Chief Technical Officer, and I was Chief Town Planner. So we would have driven the length, full length, on numerous occasions of the ABC Highway and selected those sites. Drawings were prepared. They also got planning approval, but unfortunately, we've never been able to build any of those structures. And we were very, very deliberate in the site selection, in that all of the lands chosen was under the ownership and control of the Crown.
Indeed. And I must tell you, I understand, I feel your pain. While you drove the length and breadth of the highway, I actually walked it with the same thing in mind. And it really is a tale about the way in which we do things in government in Barbados, that 25 years later, we are at this stage once again, trying to reinvent a wheel that had largely been structured or designed before. Would it be correct to say then that after having done the land use study, planning permissions were actually obtained for some of the sites that were looked at that time?
Yes, Chair. Planning permissions were obtained for some of the sites.
Fine. And are you in a position to identify, or were those, I don't know if you heard Mr. Bowen. Mr. Bowen had pointed us to some sites. I'm not sure if these are the same sites, but do you know off the top of your head those areas along the highway that were granted planning permission? I ask that simply because I want to be, let me just quote the draft bill. The Minister, on consultation with the National Vending Committee, may by order designate its vending zone for the purposes of this act. It is the intention of this Minister to treat very broadly to the development of vending and vending zones. So if there are some that have already gotten planning permission, it allows us then to move swiftly towards establishment. We ain't gonna wait on planning permission, we got that already, unless that has lapsed. So guide me please, sir.
Sure, Chair. Start with your last point first. Unfortunately, those permissions would have lapsed because more than 5 years would have passed, and I think we would have done those. As a matter of fact, this was done specifically to end as all part of the World Cup planning. So World Cup was back in 2007. So that planning permission would have lapsed. But those sites were, I refer to that area as Graham Hall. This is to the immediate south of the Ministry of Agriculture. There was right off of that roundabout, there would have been a road developed. As you come into the roundabout, you would have gone off into the vending area, and when you complete your business, you would have rejoined the vending area.
That is on the open area of land on the right-hand side if you're going down the hill.
Right-hand side if you're going down the hill, that's correct, Minister.
Right.
Coming up from there and headed up the hill and then to the Garfield Sobers roundabout, where if you make the left, you go to Rendezvous. There is an area in there which is now being used for the valeting of vehicles. That was the second site chosen because that land was also under the ownership of the Crown. It used to be beautified some years ago by the NCC. As we leave there and head along what is commonly known as Wildy, we would make the make the turn by the gas station, and then over the hill by the Samuel Jackman Prescott Polytechnic, and make our way to the Emancipation Statue.
Right.
And to the immediate left there, where there's now the Starbucks and the iMart, that open area, we utilize some of that area, but we also bore in mind that on Emancipation Day on August 1st, that when the Barbadians gather to pay tribute and homage to our ancestors, we made sure that we left a sufficiently large area that would not inhibit that activity. So as a result, that facility was placed at the northernmost end of that open strip, where there is already an existing access to rejoin traffic on the highway. So you would have come in on what is now the iMart on the Starbucks side, or if you were already on the highway, you can easily make the left turn and come in. And then from there, we proceeded north.
Don't go so fast yet. Don't
Sorry.
go so fast yet, because at that particular spot, there is a little bit of vending taking place there now. As you put it, just before you turn in to go to Starbucks, there's some people who do some business right there on the corner.
Right, but that was not the site, because what happens is that those persons who do the vending there, people who are traversing that road, let's say, for example, you're leaving LESC on your way to the Emancipation Statue, those people that you will see there on the left just before you go into Starbucks, that was not the intended area, because when persons stop there, they impede the free flow of traffic. So you were making the left turn there and going inside, and actually your activity would take place parallel to the ABC highway.
Can I ask you at this point, just because I'm going to let it continue, but I just want to get some clarity from you, because you got a lot of experience in planning. How difficult would it be, having gotten permissions for certain sites before, to have those permissions reactivated, for want of a better way of putting it?
I obviously can't speak for the chief town planner, but I don't see any reason why those permissions cannot be revalidated when a new application is submitted, because the requisite studies were undertaken, and the agency responsible for the traffic and the traffic movement, the Ministry of Transport and Works, or the Ministry of Public Works, as was the then nomenclature, we being town planning had worked very closely with that agency, and that was chosen. All of those sites were jointly chosen.
Okay, fair enough. I myself had noted that site as a potential one, so I am heartened by what you're saying to me, and the necessary follow-up work will be done. So please proceed. You leave there, and you're heading now.
You're headed north
towards Warren's.
North and west towards Warren, and at the Waterford roundabout. And pardon me, I should remember the correct names, but at the Waterford roundabout, where you go left to Commermere and right to Huddersfield turning, there is an old building there called the Comery, and as you
on the left-hand side.
On the left-hand side. So
right.
Persons would have made the left out of the roundabout, and then the first right as you head along what is now referred to as the Waterford Boulevard. You would have then made the right onto an existing road, which was actually the old highway. And right now it is beautifully planted with some miniature breadfruit and some other. It's very well landscaped. And there was an area in there that had been selected where that activity would have, the vending activity would have taken place, and then persons would have been safely able to rejoin traffic.
And there's already infrastructure there, because that road, there's a road that runs parallel to the highway.
Correct.
Yes.
Correct. There's already infrastructure there. The intention when we did the site selection was to ensure that we remove the danger of pedestrians coming into conflict with fast-moving traffic. Hence the reason why such time was taken to ensure that there were properly designated parking spaces and that the turning movements would have been easy, because we understand how the Barbadian operates. We know that persons would want to pull over on the shoulder and try to walk down the little swale and then get their things and drive back and then go back to the car and try to rejoin the traffic. And the intention was to make that as difficult as possible, because again, merging in traffic that is traveling at 80 kilometers an hour is fairly tricky. You have to, you have to be very, 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 very careful. And then the last site, sir, was there was a site at Warrens, but that is no longer available, because that is now the home of Digicel. But there used to be a green strip between the mahogany trees, which are directly behind or to the direct south of the First Caribbean International Bank, right back to Simpson Motors. There used to be a green area in there that was preserved for beautification. And that site was identified as a possible site for Warrens. But in order to get to that site, you would have gone to the roundabout at Warrens and made the turn as if you're going up to Redmond's Village, and then make the turn as if you're going into Simpson Motors. The only thing is, instead of going into Simpson Motors, you would turn onto the old Highway 2A and then drive to your vending site, and then repeat that journey in order to get back on and rejoin the traffic. So you would have rejoined the traffic, made a left turn, come into the roundabout, and then from there you can choose which direction you would go.
Okay. Your former colleague, now retired Permanent Secretary Reed, and I would have spent a little time in Warrens trying to identify another site. And I will not identify that site now, because I don't want the proprietors to start to see dollar bills in their eyes. But what I would want to do is to have a conversation with you more privately, and perhaps we can organize a visit to that site with your technical people, so that the necessary advice could be given on the way forward with respect to Warrens, because it is obviously an important area for the continuation of vending in Barbados.
Sure, Chair, at your convenience.
Now, are there any other requests for the floor from any other members of the committee? No? Okay. Permanent Secretary and Mr. Durant, sorry. Oh, sorry, beg your pardon, Mr. Prescott, the floor is yours.
Good morning to everybody. How long has passed since the expiration of the validation of these specific locations? I'm just thinking in terms that everything don't remain fixed, so the chances are that in locations that we had agreed upon some time ago, the chances are that conditions around the specific location might change, and therefore I guess we may have to revisit actually not just the approvals then, but we may have to revisit the locations to make sure that all physical conditions remain the same now as they were when the specific locations were valid.
Yeah, your question is a fair one. When I toured the highway to identify sites, that's how I became aware of the fact that some of this work had already been done. I didn't know it was 25 years ago, PS, but I became aware because some members of your staff alerted me to the fact that some of this work had been done previously. The fact of the matter is that...
Chair, if I may, just for clarity, the 25 years relates to the ABC Highway Land Use Study.
Right.
But those sites were actually selected between 2005 and 2006.
Okay. So that there are some places, for example, I'm just trying to assist Mr. Prescott. The Warrens example you gave, I'm sure you would agree, PS, that remains much the same today as it was back then. The Graham Hall example.
Graham Hall remains the same, but I do appreciate the concern of Mr. Prescott, because he's correct. Like, for example, at Rendezvous, there is two two business activities going on there. I don't know if the land has been leased by the Ministry of Housing, but certainly the area that would have been identified cannot exist with those two activities which are currently taking place.
Agreed.
And Haggett Hall and Comery, we would be able to carry out the development at Haggett Hall and Comery as previously planned. And as you correctly said, sir, you have to do a completely new search for a site at Warrens.
Right. So that we have some ammunition to work with. It is just a question of now trying to drive this process forward. Minister Prescott, you had anything else? I wanted PS to get now your views on the structure of the vending zones along the highway. Ideally, we would have a set of circumstances similar to what exists at Graham Hall, where we would have vast acreage of land to be able to create a zone. But if you use, for example, the front of Dighton Griffith School, obviously there's considerable restriction in terms of what is now available, and it may have some implications for the width of the playing facility at that school. Much of the land there is owned by the Crown. In your judgment, do you think it is a reasonable thing to have a shoulder off of the highway where one pretty much exits the lane, left lane on the highway? You ride onto a parallel shoulder that allows you to do the business that you wish to do by way of procuring whatever you wish to procure from the vendors, and then rejoin the highway as you go forward again. Does that type of construct seem to make sense to you?
Chair, I think we will have to look at that type of construct very, very carefully, because the challenge there is, even if we are able to pull the fence back onto the playing field by maybe 10, 15 meters, the challenge is traffic rejoining the moving traffic on that lane headed west, because you're then asking persons to go from zero to join traffic at that point, because I don't see the potential for any slip lane of 300 to 400 meters that would allow you to generate a volume of speed at least 40, 50 kilometers that you can then safely integrate into the traffic, because of the housing construction which is currently on the way to the immediate west of the Dighton Griffith playing field. So, Chair, I think that is going to be a very difficult site. I know my colleague engineers would say that anything can be designed, but as a planner, I'd be very concerned with that in terms of conflicts. And another thing that we looked at, and by we I'm speaking of former permanent secretary nurse and former chief technical officer Thornhill, when we selected those sites, we looked at the possibility, and of course we hope that it's something that would never occur, but the event of a motorist losing control and crashing into the vending activity. And that was one of the things that led us to try to find sites which were somewhat removed from the moving traffic. But Dighton Griffith is a particularly difficult location, and to be quite fair and honest, I would not want to reduce the playing field there by 10 to 15, pushing that fence back 10 to 15 meters, because it appears to me as if it is also used as a community playing field, and I think we need to push the concept of community playing fields. When we looked at the Dighton Griffith site, because of the heightened activity that took place there, we drove, as I said, we started from the airport, and the only solution we could have found for the Dighton Griffith vendors was to move them to the Graham Hall, to the Graham Hall location, because there was no other place on the ABC highway where we could get traffic safely off of the highway, set up a vending facility, and then get traffic safely back onto the highway. And if you traverse from Dayton Griffith through the roundabout, the next open area is that area which will be to the east of the vet, and the west of Briar Hall. But that is a fairly significant depression, and which serves as a retention pond, because it takes and retains a significant amount of water off of the ABC highway. So we were restricted in terms of finding an alternate site for the Dayton Griffith vendors outside of Graham Hall.
It may be worth a site visit, PS, but we can organize these things after this stage has been passed.
Sure.
Because even as you speak, I had done some quiet consultation with members of the committee who like me, did not necessarily, I don't want to say we didn't share, but did not appreciate the extent of the challenge that you were raising. But enough of that. I believe that Senator Holder has indicated a request to speak with you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Good morning to all those in the outer room. I quite, Mr. Chair, enjoyed that presentation from PS Cummins, and to note the work that was done by the ministry in the past, and I commend the PS and his team for that. And I'm wondering, Chair, beyond the presentation made relative to the ABC highway, if there's been any other research done or assessment done on the other 7 highways, or any of the secondary roads for that matter, that would inform this committee as we look in the near future at the whole issue of the vending zone. So in short, Chair, has there been any similar work done on any of the other 7 highways beyond the ABC highway?
Good morning, Senator. Thanks for the question. I am not aware of any extensive land use study done on the other highways, but I will be quick to say, or hasten to say, that the physical development plan also recognizes vending as a very important economic activity, and there are areas along the other highways, like for example, you have corridors along Highway 1, you have corridors along Highway 7, where some activities can take place. I think something that we need to look at in Barbados is having temporary vending sites. So it's good that the law has identified a vending zone, but I think we can have temporary vending sites. Like for example, the Esplanade, and I'm speaking now of we have the Esplanade in Fitz Village, we have the Esplanade along Highway 1 at Hastings. These are areas that can be used for vending for specific periods. What we need to ensure, one, we do not allow persons to erect permanent structures. Two, we have the time set, designated times. I've seen in some European cities, but especially in Paris, sometimes from 9 in the morning until 1 p.m., they will close the street. It becomes a designated vending zone because it's in an area of heightened economic activity, because vending thrives when you have a lot of people moving. But at 1 o'clock, when you pass that area at 1:30, you would never know that vending took place there between 9 and 1. I've said all of that to say we have areas along the other designated highways that we can use that can take the activity off of the actual carriageway or shoulder. And Spring Garden, the vending setup at Spring Garden is a perfect example of that, and that is also an activity that was planned.
Thank you, Permanent Secretary. Are there any more requests for the floor? Well, P.S., I see no more requests for the floor. I want to just ask one other question, and that perhaps is of those members of your delegation who are connected to planning now. Well, you yourself have that background. Part of what we envisage for the vending committee, the vending zones, is obviously the introduction of the amenities. We want to have the running water and so on. The question that I ask of you is, do you envisage a significant degree of difficulty in those zones that you have already pointed us to? No, Chair. They having access to running water, certainly on the ABC sites that we would have looked at. There was very easy access. The good thing about it is we use all existing infrastructure, so to be able to have a water connection would not be difficult at all. And as I was saying to one of my colleagues earlier this morning, a former permanent secretary, Mr. Weeks, we did this long before even the first SARS, furthermore now COVID. So sanitary facilities are even more important now than back then. So therefore, we must have that facility, and we must also ensure that we have bathroom facilities for the vendors. So I don't see any difficulty in having running water and to be able to put up those facilities. I think the biggest challenge is to education for the vendors, and I mean education in terms of why the facility, how to use the facility. And if the question is asked why I've mentioned that, I will use Spring Garden as an example. Spring Garden is a design and purpose-built facility for vending. The vendors were happy, they moved down there, but then a couple months after, you saw some of them complain that people were not coming, and they decided they want to go back up to Cheapside. Yes, there is a lot more foot traffic at Cheapside, but the ministry again was instrumental because the transport board runs a specific shuttle on Saturdays, starting from 8 in the morning until I think 6 or 7 in the evening, to transport people to Spring Garden, because we all know that everybody does not have access to a car. So therefore, you need to make provision for those persons who do not have cars. So as I said, I'm in full support of the vending zones. I think we can safely select those vending zones and ensure that the development is orderly, and everyone will be happy. But we must make sure that we control the vending within the facility and do not allow it to come outside of the facility. Those of us who are old enough to know that in the old Fairchild Street, you walked across the bridge, you went down the steps, and then in those days we called them hawkers, we saw all the vendors there. What happens now is that the vendors have moved themselves now onto the bridge, where they have impeded the free flow of the pedestrian traffic, so that they try to get to the customers first. And when you find that, the vending zone has a linear extension, sometimes with no limit. So I think those are the kind of things that we really need to control, and to show them that as vendors, they will be able to make a decent living, and as this bill will ensure that vending is decent economic activity, and it is historically steeped in our lifeblood and our cultures and traditions. So
vending is a part of us. And when you see the size of vending facilities in a lot of African countries, Senegal, Kenya, it is amazing and it is beautiful. But the challenge is to have persons in a safe space and to maintain that order once they have left.
Thank you, PS. You really have demonstrated some almost encyclopedic knowledge of the structural issues which are critical to support this endeavor. And as I indicated to you, I will take you up on your generous offer, and we can do a visit with your minister to some of the areas that we are looking at, both the ones that have already benefited from planning permission and the ones that we propose to utilize as we go forward. But we can set the date for that in due course. To you and your team, I want to thank you, sir. Hold on a minute, Mr. Prescott.
I don't know if this if this would be relevant to where we are at present, but I kind of extrapolate from the conversation that the element of time is a major void in the legislation. I'm a little bothered about, as we continue to expand commercial activities across the island, giving certain types of businesses the freedom of opening 24 hours. We need to apply time, that kind of freedom. If we are talking about equality, we need to apply that kind of liberty to vendors as well. I know that on special occasions, vendors have to apply for license to operate after a certain period. I don't know if at present a vendor is allowed to open like from 6 in the morning or 7 in the morning till 5 in the evening, and then after a certain time they must close. But if we're fully integrating vending into the business environment in the manner that we seem to be suggesting that forms the ethos of the whole arrangement, I feel that we need to at least spend some time focusing on time. Well, I am not almost saying unlimited time, so to speak, as a major variable of concern for me, and I was expressing the same view.
Fair observation. Fair observation. The Deputy Chief Parliamentary Counsel, you wanted the floor?
Yes, Chair. Just on the same issue, there is provision for the permit system for occasional vending. So I will just remind the committee that the occasional vending is supposed to be to allow persons to conduct vending during a fair or farmers market, festival, carnival, or cultural, entrepreneurial, religious, or recreational event. So it does contemplate that kind of organization, but then in relation to what the PS was speaking to, that is something that perhaps you may need to explore a little more. The policy would have to be articulated a little more so that we can incorporate it in the bill if you so choose. Thanks.
Mr. Prescott and PS, I like UPS, have been very touched and moved by what I saw in Africa with respect to vending. On this question that Mr. Prescott raises with regard to time and it going on into the night, that was one of the things that most impressed me, coming from that sad place that they call the door of no return. Going back to the hotel where I stayed, there were a number of cities that we would have passed through, towns that we would have passed through at 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock in the night, and vending was a thriving team. And I said this on the floor of the House when I piloted this bill. It was places were teeming with activity, families out together. You can see mother with children and so on at 8, 9 o'clock in the night in a vending type environment. And they were not there only as vendors, they were there to participate as people who went to purchase from vendors and fruits and drinks, etc., food and so on. I see no reason why the vending zones should not be properly equipped. This is an age where we have the photovoltaic lighting. It is an age where we already make provision at occasional vending opportunities for lighting to be brought in, run off of generators in this particular regard. But I think if we're setting up vending zones, we need to do it holistically and so as to allow for not only the running water and the bathrooms, but also the lighting, and to make it as conducive as possible for it to be an all-day experience. So for me, I think gone hopefully forever are the days where we say to people that you can't work beyond a certain hour. In fact, P.S., now that I say that, it raises another question in my mind that I had actually forgotten. The question, P.S., of what happens now on the highway. Are you in a position to assist me here? I am told by the vendors I have interfaced with, many of them, that some of the challenges they have with, say, for example, coconut shells being left on the road until the next day, and in some cases, the day after, because I didn't come and work the next day for whatever reason, so the shells remain there, is that you can't move the shells after a certain time because disposal of them is not possible. Is there, in your experience, any veracity to that submission? Your mic is off, sir. I still not hearing him. I think that's better.
Are you hearing me now?
I'm hearing you now.
Yes, I think the SBRC facility, which takes the coconut shells, I think that closes at a specific time. But I don't accept that argument because they can still load it onto the truck or put it in a skip. While you may not be able to dispose of it the same day, we can't support leaving it on the side of the road. It's very unsightly. So if logistically that is something that we need to look at.
The permanent secretary is in need of technical support, please, because he's on a very important point, and we're not being able to hear him. Okay, while the technical folks assist in the other room, what I will do, P.S., we will come back to you, but in the interim, I will ask Minister Cummins to take the floor.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I want to start first by commenting on the point made by Mr. Prescott in terms of time. I too would want to support the treatment of vending as a day to night experience. I think you, Minister, would have been the one who pioneered the concept of festive Fridays and the night markets in the area of Pelican Village. And even if you were to go well beyond, you don't even have to go as far as the African continent, but in Jamaica, for example, if you can go to the downtown boardwalks now, you have both day and nighttime activity. And I think one of the key things, especially as it relates to the city of Bridgetown, has been the attempt to revitalize Bridgetown, to bring life back into the city, and in so doing, bring people back into the city. And so by creating that opportunity where people can actively go, and again, the vending zones, when we talked about it earlier, I believe it was on Wednesday, we discussed the possibility of treating to where I could procure food items, where I could go for craft, where I could go for pottery, those kinds of things. If we have that vibrant, thriving night market environment, I believe it adds value, certainly from a tourism perspective, in terms of things to do, but it also integrates into the psyche of the Barbadian culture, that I can do my shopping at night, even though I've been at work or in other activities during the course of the day, and it's something that I very much support. The question of the highway and coconuts, I think, Chairman, that is something that I'm hopeful the Permanent Secretary can have resolved when he comes back on to the call and give us some advice on how it can be treated to, because it also raises the question, Chairman, of not just the removal of the coconut shells and how unsightly it is, but I know that we have had an ongoing national fixation with a single issue, that issue being COVID, but that does not mean that we are still not treating to issues of dengue and mosquito-borne illnesses. And it is a real challenge to continue to have coconut shells left on the highway to accumulate, especially during the rainy season when we are having mosquito-borne issues, because they then become vectors. But more importantly, Chairman, I think also when dealing with the question of vending on the highways, there has to be an accompanying code of conduct that attaches itself to that particular vending zone. Mr. Chairman, I am concerned each time, especially when I pass certain areas of the ABC highway, that you may have 3 or 4 or 5 vendors adjacent to each other selling the same things, particular coconuts, and trying to get the attention of drivers and cars passing by. They're bobbing and weaving in between the coconuts, attempting to handle their wares out into the road. There are Barbadian drivers who, for some inexplicable reason, Chairman, find themselves in a position where they are willing to stop on the highway in order to purchase coconuts, coconut water from vendors on the highway. And so it creates a real hazard, both for vendors bobbing and weaving in between traffic, darting across the highway, trying to get people's attention, and Barbadian drivers doing what I have just described in the most dangerous of fashions and stopping on a highway where there is to be no stopping. So I would want to support the designation of the zones, yes, but I would want to ensure that there is adequate enforcement of an appropriate code of conduct that manages that vending in a way that keeps everyone safe, vendors, drivers, and of course consumers equally.
Fair enough, and thank you, Minister. On the latter point, I am sure we'll have an opportunity to come back to that when we have the relevant market managers come to give evidence in a few minutes. Let me say to you, though, that I fully agree with what you said before. There are some vendors who I have encountered who not only say, but I have then double-checked, they have robustly disassociated themselves from the practice of leaving coconut shells on the highway. So I wouldn't want us to paint with a broad brush. There are obviously some, however, who need to still be worked with and persuaded to the merit of the points that you have made. Because, as I've said to them myself, we are fighting two battles at the same time. On one hand, we are fighting the COVID pandemic, and then on the other hand, we are spending a lot of time, money, and effort on trying to deal with the vector-borne illnesses. And whether it is the mosquitoes or the vermin that come from leaving coconuts unattended, it is a problem that we have to treat too. We were trying to see if we could locate Minister Ford, but until he comes back, is Permanent Secretary P.S., are you with us again?
Can you hear me, Chair?
I can hear you clearly now. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, P.S. Cummins. Now, where you left off, well, actually, perhaps what you should do is just restate much of what you said, because we lost you on more than one occasion, so.
Okay.
Fine.
As it relates to the removal of the coconut shells from the highway, if the proposal or the remodeled proposal of having designated sites for vending on the highway, if that is adopted, then the unsightly coconut shells that we currently see on the highway that will be a thing of the past. Because as I said, proper garbage disposal facilities were put in place in the form of skip. So as you cut the coconut, you throw it in the skip, and then the truck comes, hooks up the skip, and takes it and takes it away to the recycling facility. And we all know the benefits of coconut fiber and those things. If we do not have those designated sites, then regrettably, I think what we see now is unfortunately going to be with us, and that creates numerous problems. I have to agree with the Minister of Tourism 100%, because it exposes us to the dengue threat, the Zika, and all the other diseases carried by mosquitoes. So I think that's something that should not be any significant challenge for us. I think, as I come back again, I say education. If we can point out to persons that the need for cleanliness, the need for order, and that can be understood. I agree with her that you must have spacing, but not spacing on the shoulder of the highway as it exists. I think there will be more than enough space for the vendors within the facility and on the perimeter of the facility, because the facility as it was designed was not intended to contain the vendor within that facility. The facility was designed with the bathrooms and the running water for the vendors to be able to utilize, but the vending activity was actually going to take place on the outside of the facility, but allowing for the free movement of the traffic. But as Mr. Prescott said, I'm sure there's need to revisit it, because a significant 15 years is a long time, and that is the time that has elapsed. But Chair, if you would permit me, while I have access to the mic, I must pick up on two things I had forgotten. One, in the proposed amendment to the physical development plan back in 2017, and I know some work is being done on it now, that document as a policy, because as we know it has to be approved, while it's not law, it has to be approved by both houses of parliament, sought to establish at farms or persons who have agricultural plots, to allow them to establish small areas where they could sell their produce, pushing the whole concept of the farmers market, also fitting in with the concept of health and wellness in terms of getting people to eat, getting persons to eat more healthy. So as a result, the farmer does not now have to go through the whole process of putting the things in the car and carrying them to a particular location. They have the option of setting up something on their property where they can sell their produce. That's one. And two, as it relates to vending and after hours, I fully support after hours vending. As a matter of fact, Historic Bridgetown and its garrison was approved by UNESCO in 2011. At the time, I was the site manager for the site and also the chairman of the local World Heritage Committee. And on many occasions, we made recommendations that we need to utilize the benefits of it doesn't swing anymore, it lifts now, the lift bridge. What we had said is that the last Friday of every month, we should have a designated zone from the Independence Arch where you can have activities ongoing. You can utilize certain areas of the boardwalk. Of course, you'll have to close it off to traffic. But you can have that as an experience where persons will see the bridge lift. And then when the bridge comes back to its original state, you have an area there where persons can be vending and you can have people walking up and down and have a significant amount of activity. I hope that as we move into the development of the Hyatt and those other hotels in that area, that is an activity that we can see come alive, because that will provide so many opportunities for vending community. It is also a safe and wholesome space. It can spill over all the way back to Heroes Square. And that can be a safe area where persons can walk, they can, enjoy coconut water, Morbi, all the other local things that we have and enjoy. And we are not trying to do that to fight against Oistins or Baxter's Road and the other areas, but it also gives another layer of activity that we can use. And the good thing about it is sometimes there's funding available by UNESCO to help you with what they refer to as that intangible heritage, because the land shit and the tuck ban and the indigenous drinks and things like that. You do get small grants to deal with those things. So I would hope that the Ministry of Culture will pick up on that. And also it gets the younger Barbadian, and maybe the older Barbadian too, to see the bridge lifting. And it is unique. The only other place that I'm aware in the Caribbean area, now I've stretched out and brought the ABC Islands in, is Curacao, where they have a bridge that lifts. But I think we have an asset that we need to utilize. And I said Ministry of Culture, but I think the Ministry of Tourism also needs to look at these kind of opportunities where we can then bring some life back to our historic city. And as people walk around, you never know, in time the stores may open a little later.
I fully agree with you. I'm sure that the Minister of Tourism does too. I must tell you that the closing off of the road was the part of the Festive Friday concept. And I can see no reason why this other suggestion ought not to be treated in similar vein. I hope that the day will come when we get back to the Festive Friday concept. I know it's not possible now. But equally, once we can again be able to socialize and circulate and do the things that make us what we are, who we are. I think that is really the empowering environment for the vending community. And obviously, it works for those people who are our visitors, because we have a very special city, and it can't be as special as it could be otherwise if we have a bridge that nobody can see being swung or lifted, or if we have fountains that nobody can see working, and that type of thing. But these are things that can and must be fixed. Minister Ford, I think that I was made to understand that you may wish to make an intervention with respect to the SBRC closure, impacting as it does on the ability of some vendors to get their coconut shells, etc., from the highway to the dump in an appropriate time, on Sundays in particular, weekends in particular.
Based on the information given to me, SBRC is open specifically for coconut vendors, because that is the cell that will deal with the composting and the area that we're dealing with the recyclable material from that coconut deposit. And I must tell you that they have assured me that the opening time on Sunday runs from 3 p.m. to 6 p.m. every single Sunday, once a Sunday exists in the land of thy dear Lord.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Well, I have no doubt that much of this is going to be about proper management of the vending zones and enforcing the regulations and bringing order to what has really been an environment that organically was created and unfortunately was not allowed to develop in a very structured way. It is really a demonstration of the inherent creativity of our people. It has to be facilitated, but as we heard from Barvin themselves, it runs counter to the interests of the vendor if the regulatory environment is not there, because then chaos will break out and nobody wants to be part of chaos. PS and team.
Mr. Chair, I know PS Cummins had indicated that the trucks could actually collect the coconut shells and hold them until the Monday. That is where the concern came in, and most of the truck drivers were saying at one time that sometimes during the Sundays they have other things to do, and they don't have enough trucks that they can put the coconut shells on and wait until Monday in order to deliver them to SBRC. So I know that SBRC at one time closed the landfill because they were cutting back expenditure. And I'm hearing from you now that the opening hours is now 3 to 6. So obviously the trucks that are collecting the coconut shells will have to collect it in the afternoon and get it to SBRC between 3 and 6 o'clock. So that has to be communicated to the vendors and the truck drivers very clearly. And I don't think it was ever fairly vented. So the truck drivers and the vendors will have to know that. And I believe if that is done, it's unlikely that we will have the backing up of the coconut shells, especially during the Sunday until the Monday morning.
With your permission, Chair, and through you, I would undertake to ensure that this information is fully ventilated in the public domain so that those persons involved in this type of activity would not be disadvantaged. I would undertake to do that.
I am much obliged. P.S. Cummins and team, unless my colleagues on the committee have any further requests for the floor, and I am not seeing any such requests at this. Oh, here, Senator Wiggins. I beg your pardon. Floor is yours, ma'am. Senator Wiggins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to go back to the question of permissions and licenses for vendors. I think I heard earlier that at the moment, especially as we know along the ABC highway, persons are just setting up arbitrarily. Is there any, specifically to the PS, any action in the future for all the vendors now who are setting up along the highway to be licensed in the new vending zones? That's question number one. And question number two, as it relates to the Warren's location, right opposite the Mansur building on the left-hand side as you're going back to the bell, I think that might have been identified earlier as a location. So for the Warrens area. So can we revisit that opposite the Michael Mansur building, if you're going to put there as a vending zone, and the whole question of licenses for vendors?
I'll allow P.S. Cummins to speak to the second part of your question. If you go, Senator Wiggins, to clause 12 of the bill, you'll see that the proposed areas that could be vending zones are enumerated. They include beaches, esplanades, fish landing sites, gardens, parks, public markets, and they can be extended by the minister with responsibility for small business development. I must tell you that this particular minister is of the view that vending along the highways should be encouraged to continue, and there will be vending zones created, which is why I taxed PS Cummins so extensively on the land use survey along that highway, because I do believe that we have an opportunity to foster a level of entrepreneurship in a very structured way along the highways of Barbados. Having said that, yes, to answer your question directly, there will be a requirement for vendors within the zones to be licensed. And the truth of the matter is that if you are not vending within a zone, you will be running afoul of the legislation anyway. So it stands to reason that in accordance with Clause 16, a person who engages in vending in a place other than a vending zone shall be subject to the payment of an administrative penalty. We wouldn't want people to be forced to pay an administrative penalty, so we will have to license them and give them their permissions to do what we want them to do. P.S. Cummins, are you in a position to speak to the second limb of Senator Wiggins' question, please?
Thanks, Chair. I think the area to the immediate east of the First Caribbean facility, or as I usually refer to it, immediately opposite the grove of mahogany trees on the eastern side, that can be looked at. But I think if I take my memory back to my former position, that site always had specific problems in terms of getting traffic into it and out of it because of its specific location, and then you have traffic coming from St. Thomas into the roundabout. I think that may pose some challenges for a vending site where you're going to have so much activity, in terms of vehicle movements in and out. But it can be looked at. I think there are many other options in Warrens. Unfortunately, there's land in Warrens owned by the Crown, by the state-owned enterprise, the National Housing Corporation. But there are other areas in Warrens that can be facilitated for the vending. It's going to be off the highway, but it would not be any significant inconvenience to persons who want to go and make their purchases. And we will notice that the highway going up from Green Hill, that's Highway 2, Jason. Highway 2 going up from Green Hill, that the vendors have taken over that facility, and the crosswalk that we placed there for persons who are attending the polyclinic and coming over and doing other business, they now stroll across there and stop the traffic and then carry out the necessary activities. So that's one of the things I was referring to when I spoke of the order. And I think, again, as long as we provide the necessary education, create the vending zones, and encourage persons to go in there. I don't think you want to use the big stick or a hammer, but I think you just need to continue to use moral suasion and public education, because it's not only the vendor we have to educate, but we also have to educate the customers. Because if I do not buy from someone who is in the crosswalk, and collectively we do not buy from someone who is in the crosswalk, that vendor is going to leave the crosswalk because they realize they're not getting any sales there. So this is a major undertaking, but I think it is certainly worth it, and our ministry, we will play our role in a very significant way to ensure that this is a success.
Thank you, P.S. And I want to thank you and all the members of your team. This is a perhaps underutilized part of the parliamentary process, and it is nonetheless very invaluable, however, because it enables us as legislators to get a full grasp of the physical environment and circumstantial environment within the context within which we are trying to frame the legislation, and to be responsive in a realistic way to some of the challenges on the ground. So I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart, and I reiterate my commitment that I will reach out to you in the soonest possible time, and your minister, so that we will be in a position to physically do the necessary visits to spots along the highway, and anywhere else that might be necessary. So at this point, colleagues, we have waiting Mr. Eric Lewis, the public markets, from the Public Markets Fisheries Division, Ms. Melanie Holder, also from that division, and Vernell Nichols from the Barbados National Union of Fisherfolk. And obviously this gives us an opportunity to focus on the fisheries sector with respect to the business of vending. P.S. I would want to thank you and to point out to you that within an hour's time or so, we will have lunch available. I suspect that you may no longer be on the premises, but there is an invitation to you to join us in the event that you care to come back. Certainly, what we're going to ask you now is to just demit the facilities that you now hold. We will do the necessary preparation so as to be faithful to the protocols and allow those others who are waiting on the outside to take the place that you now have. So once again, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Chair, on behalf of my colleagues who are here and myself, and also on behalf of the other technical members of staff and the Minister. We certainly thank you for this opportunity, and we hope that we've been able to bring some valuable information to this process. Thank you.
Thank you. Colleagues, we will now, I propose that we take a 5-minute break. So could I just have a motion that we suspend for 5 minutes, please? Minister
Motion
Ford?
to suspend for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Seconded?
Seconded.
Thank you. We are accordingly suspended.